Now, hello. Today we're here with poet Jerome Rothenberg, who's going to read his poem and discuss it for Sign and Breath. Welcome, Jerry.
I'm going to read from a series of poems called That Dada Strain, with particular focus on World War I Dada poet Hugo Ball. That Dada strain, the zigzag mothers of the gods of science, the lunatic, fixed stars and pharmacies, fathers who left the tents of anarchism unguarded, the Arctic bones strung out on Saint-Germain like tom-toms, living light bulbs, aphrodisia. Art is junk, the urinal says. Dig a hole and swim in it. A message from the grim computer. Ye are hamburgers. For that evening's reading, he had made himself a special costume. His legs were in a shiny blue cylinder that reached up to his hips so that he looked like an obelisk. Over it, he wore a coat collar cut out of cardboard, scarlet on the inside and gold on the outside. It was fastened at the neck in such a way that he could give the impression of wing-like movements by raising and lowering his elbows. He also wore a high blue and white striped witch doctor's hat. A glass tube ecstasy for Hugo Ball. A glass tube for my leg, says Hugo Ball. My hat a cylinder in blue and white. The night, the German ostriches, the sink he pisses in. All these become his world, his Dada song begun there, holds the image until it comes at us. The image from its cross looks down, a ribbon, a revolver, mud. These contribute to his death, also to what his death contributes later, to hysterical, to sick with God and time. A carousel, a roasted poet fish, the queen says to his mind, and enters where the street of mirrors starts. She sees his face reflected in hunger of the world as pain, the consciousness of death, not why we die, but why we dream about it, and why our dreams can't save the dying remnant. Hugo, as I write this poem, the voice cries from a further room. The dancer, singer calls me from a further room. I step into an obelisk below the waist. My mouth opens to sing, but freezes shut in grief for you, Bula, Take, Bitly, Soloncola, the collapse of language. Tabla, tota, tota, takabala, taka, glass tube, ecstasy escapes from time, babula, balam, the image and the word over your bed hang crucified. Again, the cabaret explodes. Again, one foot in glass, a glass nerve, and a priestly gas pump pulls her hair out.
Jerome Rothenberg. Thank you so much for that. And I was going to say reading, but I realized, Jerry, you don't do readings. You do experiences. You managed to bring in so many different elements when I just not only talk about orality, but presence, physical presence, the communication between you and your audience. And I'm wondering, tell me a little bit about how that's developed in your work under so many different rubrics, so many different subgenres and areas of concern. But one thing that holds it all together is this sense of physicality.
Yeah, well, some of it has developed in collaboration with other artists, particularly musicians. Straight poetry reading would be a different tone, maybe a little bit the way I read the description of the scene at the Cabaret Voltaire. For that evening's reading, he made himself a special costume, his legs were, but as I started working with the musicians, particularly percussionists and contrabassists, so a long time collaboration with Bertram Turetsky, contrabassist, and other musicians, and that changed my way of reading because it reinforced, the rhythm. It got me into the rhythm of what I had already written. The zigzag mothers of the gods of science, the lunatic fixed star, I can beat it out that way. So it was a process, and we were, I and many others, getting into performance. And the first time I did a serious performance of poems from that Dada strain, a student had made me a Hugo Ball costume. So I appeared, I was also playing Hugo Ball. That Dada strain was transformed into a theater piece by Luke Morrison and what he called the Center for Theater Science and Research, and I was the leading actor in that. I don't know if I played myself or Hugo Ball or both of them, but it became a theatrical event first here in San Diego and then in upstate New York. So and with a cast, so there are a number of people involved in the performance, but it was to emphasize the musical side, of what could be seen anyway in the writing. But I learned to do it that way. I hadn't done it that way before, and that has stayed with me where appropriate. Sometimes one wants to tone that down, and just, keep a more level feel for the poem.
Well, Jerry, you've been shaping the experience of poetry for generations, and in collaboration, it's interesting to hear about the music and also your collaboration with other cultures, prime cultures in particular. Maybe tell us a little bit about how poetry and your exploration of prime cultures has enriched your sense of the orality and physicality of poetry.
Well, it was done in celebration of my own discovery of the roots and sources of poetry, and the universality of the poetry experience, and how developed it is throughout the world, civilized and pre-civilized, and hunter and gatherer, and all stages, all possibilities, and so in the same way that we were creating new forms of our own under that impulse of the avant-garde, the experimental, I was finding, also other forms of poetry so often tied up with performance in oral cultures.
One of the things that you've just mentioned again now is the collaboration, the collaborative nature of your work. I think of a quote from you, Jerry, where you once said, I write those poems which I have not found elsewhere, and for whose existence I feel a deep need. And I'm just curious about your sense of the nature of identity as it's expressed in poetry, because it seems as if you've brought so many different kinds of identity, whether it's costumed as Hugo Ball or being with the Seneca people, and or your explorations into the Holocaust with Poland 1931 and Hurban. Tell us about how that multiplicity of identities has worked its way into your work.
Well, it's particularly in the from the mid-60s until the end of the 70s. There was a series of works. Poland, well, Technicians of the Sacred came in 1968, which tried to bring all of these things together in the form of an anthology or assemblage. covering, with a particular emphasis on orature, as it sometimes is called, oral poetry, performance in a multiplicity of cultures. And then to explore, I said, ancestral sources of my own in the world of Jewish mystics, thieves, and madmen, in a book pulled in 1931 in the early 70s. By then, we were spending time at the Seneca Indian Reservation in Western New York State, and a book came out of that called the Seneca Journal. And one would have to look into that and see how, as not a Seneca, but being there, the impact that it was having, on me, which the book expresses. But it doesn't end there. Other things keep coming into it. Curiously, too, Poland in 1931 was completed when I was living on the Seneca Indian Reservation. So a Jew among the Indians. What am I doing in this strange place with these people with strange eyes? Could be trouble, he says. Could be. Yeah, so there was that, and then later in the 70s, try to bring some of that together with the early experimental modernists from before our time, with the Dadas, in particular, in the little book called That Dada Strain. So they're Jews and Indians and Dadas came together in what David Meltzer was calling my Jewish surrealist vaudeville.
Jerome Rothenberg, thank you so much for joining us on Sign and Breath.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Phil.